How are we doing? Thank you. Thank you. A few quick things. Check your schedule, find your people, make room for the conversations that happen in the hallway, over coffee, and in the few minutes after a session when somebody finally says the thing that they actually came here to say. Take care of yourselves while you're here too. This field asks a lot of people, so let the next few days give something back to yourselves. I want to start with gratitude to our team, Kareen, Natalie, Anusha, Mara, Allison, and Tailor-Made Experience. Done an amazing job, and you've made it possible for us to come together like this. So thank you. Those are the people that have been working behind the scenes, carrying the details, the deadlines, and about 14 versions of reality at the same time, so that the rest of us could walk into this space and act like a conference just magically happens. If you've ever planned one event for more than 12 people, you already know this conference was held together by professionalism, prayer, and at least one spreadsheet that nobody fully understands. And thank you to our partners, our funders, and everyone across the field who helped build this room, expand this room, and protect this room. That matters. Rooms like this do not appear because the moment feels right. They appear because people working long after the applause would have made more sense. So before I get into the theme, I have a quick message. This is for everybody in this room, but it's also for people specifically who have experienced incarceration and for people who are incarcerated that I hope this message will reach. Because I used to think prison was the darkest place on earth. It's a pretty dark place. But the darkest places aren't the ones that you can point to on a map. They're not physical. They don't have walls. They don't have coordinates. They don't show up in photographs. They don't show up in reports. You can stand in the middle of a bright, open room like this and still be inside that dark place. Because some of the deepest darkness lives in what a person has been taught to believe about themselves. It's quiet there. It sounds like hesitation that doesn't fully explain itself. It feels like holding back without exactly knowing why. It shows up as a limit that feels natural, even when it isn't true. It's the mindset that narrows a person before they ever got the chance to expand. The one that says, stay within this range. Don't reach too far. Don't assume too much. Don't take up more space than you've been given. Over time, those messages stop feeling like something imposed. They start to feel like judgment, like instinct, like truth. And that's what makes it so powerful. Because once something lives inside you, it no longer needs reinforcement from the outside. It moves with you. It shapes how you interpret opportunity, how you read risk, how you decide whether something is meant for you or not. It turns possibility into something that feels conditional, temporary, maybe even off limits. It can make a person question their own humanity without ever using those words. Am I enough for this space? Am I allowed to be here? Is this really mine to step into? Those questions don't come from nowhere. They are learned, repeated, reinforced, sometimes directly. but always consistently enough to leave an imprint. And that's the hardest part. And people adapt to that. They become careful. They become precise about what they show. They learn how to move in ways that reduce risk, even if it also reduces possibility. From the outside, it can look like hesitation. From the inside, it feels like survival. That's why this kind of darkness is different. You can't remove it just by changing a location. You can't solve it by opening a door. You can't undo it with access alone. Because it isn't just about where someone is. It's about what has been built inside them in response to where they've been. And yet, there's something deeper still. Even in that space, something remains intact. A part of a person that remembers what it feels like to think freely, to imagine without constraint, to exist without negotiating worth. That part doesn't always disappear. It waits. Sometimes quietly, sometimes buried under years of adaptation, but it's there. And when the conditions begin to shift, when a person is met with seriousness, respect, with expectation that is real and not conditional, something begins to move. Not all at once, not dramatically, but steadily. A thought is spoken out loud that used to stay internal. A risk is taken that would have been avoided. A person begins to recognize themselves differently, not through the lens they were given, but through something they are discovering. That's not surface change. That's reorientation. And it's slow work. It takes consistency. It takes environments that don't just allow presence, but support expansion. It takes time for a person to trust what's opening is real and not temporary. And when that happens, when someone begins to see themselves without the weight of those inherited limits, the darkness doesn't disappear all at once. It recedes, and in its place, something else becomes possible. Not just opportunity, not just movement, but a different relationship to self. One that isn't built on restriction. One that doesn't require constant negotiation. One that allows a person to step forward, not cautiously, not conditionally, but fully. And that shift changes everything. So that's my message to everybody in this room, people who encounter people who are incarcerated with the darkness living inside them, that we are all tasked with trying to help bring light to and break through and help them see. So I hope that when you step in front of these folks and you engage with these people in prison, people like myself who is in prison, that you can continue to be that piece of light that they need. Because remember, a darkest place isn't always physical. Okay, to the theme, beyond access. That phrase lands because this room has already done serious work on access. You've opened doors that were closed. You've built pathways where there were none. You've defended legitimacy. You've defended the legitimacy of this work when it was easier for others to doubt it. That history deserves respect. And as we all know, there comes a point when opening the door is no longer the deepest question. Because a person can walk through a door and still carry the architecture of the old room inside of them. This is part of what prison does. This is part of what oppressive systems do. They leave residue. They leave residue in the mind, in the nervous system, in expectation, and self-concept. They shape how a person reads risk, how a person interprets silence, how a person decides whether to step forward, speak, trust, try again. After enough repetition, the system does not need to announce itself. As I just said, in the other piece, a person has already learned what to brace for. So when we talk about what happens after incarceration, or even what happens during education inside the prison, we have to get more honest about the terrain. Recidivism is not always a simple story of resources missing or opportunities absent. Sometimes the moment turns on response. What does a person do when opportunity appears but feels unstable? What does a person do when possibility arrives but doesn't feel believable? What does a person do when every prior lesson has taught them to expect the floor to move? Those responses do not come from nowhere. They're learned, they're adaptive, and they're often intelligent responses to environments that require vigilance, contraction, and self-protection. And then a classroom asks for something else. That's why beyond access has to mean more than access to education alone. It has to include access to career pathways, housing, economic mobility, stability, relationships, networks, social capital, and all the things that make a future durable enough to trust. And deeper still, it has to include access to parts of the self that have shrunk in order to survive. Not disappear, but shrink. Parts that went quiet, parts that stayed underused, parts that never had the conditions to fully emerge. There's a kind of deprivation that is material. There's another kind that's developmental. A person cannot be denied opportunity. So this is why this work matters so much. Because when college and prison is serious, it does more than transfer knowledge. It gives people a place to think with range again, to test their voice, to recover intellectual confidence, to encounter themselves outside the script handed to them by the institution. Sometimes the change is visible in achievement, sometimes it shows up in posture, sometimes it shows up in a person who no longer sounds like they're asking for permission to exist in their own mind. And I'm sure that's true for many of us here too. So look around the room. There's different priorities here, different roles, different pressures, different responsibilities, different approaches to the work. Some of you are educators. Some of you are practitioners, researchers, advocates, funders, policy people. Some are trying to hold several different identities at once and pretending that is sustainable, which is brave, and by brave I mean mildly concerning. But underneath all of that difference, there's a shared purpose. That shared purpose is not sameness, it's direction. And that's part of our organization's role in the field, to help us move in a direction together, to strengthen coherence without flattening difference, to hold space for complexity without losing momentum, to support a field that's growing, stretching, and still deciding what it wants to become at full strength. That work matters because no field becomes powerful by accident. It becomes powerful when people working from different angles begin to move with greater clarity towards the same horizon. And when that happens, the effects travel. They move through individuals, families, communities, institutions. They move through a person's sense of what's possible. They move through what a family comes to expect. They move through who gets imagined as capable, credible, ready. That kind of movement is hard to reduce. It doesn't always arrive on schedule, doesn't always fit neatly in the report. But we know when we see it, we know when we feel it. We've seen people grow into themselves. We've seen education reopen what confinement tried to close. We've seen what becomes possible when access reaches all the way down into identity, imagination, and direction, because so many imaginations have been constricted. I've had some good conversations, and there's a good author out there that talks about how imagination is a privilege that some people don't have, because you can't really imagine what you could be, who you could be, what you're worth. So that's the work in front of us over the next few days. Thank you for being here. Thank you for building this room. Thank you for continuing to push this field towards what it still has the capacity to become. Thank you.